How's everybody doing today? We're good? All right, so let's handle a real quick odds and ends. Those of you in my undergrad class, I will have a sign-in sheet out on the table again, so make sure before you leave you sign in and take care of that. Kelly, are your grad students meeting after? Yeah, we'll figure something out for the grad students. Undergrad, sign in outside. So I'm very happy to have Zoe Schlag here. I'm going to read a quick introduction for her. She is the founder of Unlimited USA, which funds Austin's most promising entrepreneurs tackling tough social, environmental, and civic problems, and backs them with seed funding, a full year of customized venture support, and strategic connections to early stage impact investors. And she's going to explain what all that means in English. Unlimited USA is currently assisting a new round of 5 entrepreneurs. Some of the issues they've tackled in the past include livable wages for refugees and cultural literacy among students. More personal note, I met Zoe last year at South by, and one of the great things about that conference is meeting people kind of change the way you see the world and make you want to think bigger. And that was definitely the impression I got after hearing Zoe talk. So I'm really excited to have her here on campus to talk with y'all. So let's welcome Zoe Schlag to Texas State.
Thank you for having me.
Okay, so as you see, we have a map behind us because Zoe is the poster child for going with the flow. And so
Sounds accurate.
we're gonna kind of walk you through her journey and how it got her to where she is today. So let's start first in high school. You're from Boulder, Colorado.
Yep, grew up in Boulder, Colorado, lived there until I was 18 years old. And
Star soccer player, was gonna play college soccer, tore your knee.
that was the hope. When I was in high school, I thought I was gonna go play college soccer, and about a couple months before I was supposed to go to these recruiting camps, I tore my ACL. So my summer was out the door, my thoughts about college were out the door. So
What was next?
I ended up deciding to go down to Brazil randomly and spent 2 weeks down there working in an orphanage in the favelas. And favelas are like slums in Brazil that in Salvador, the city where I was, they actually extend over the water. And this was kind of my first exposure to another culture that was really different from mine. And
Had you traveled internationally at that point, or was that just a spur of the moment type decision?
you know, I'd been to Europe before. My family's from Europe, but I had never been anywhere in Latin America. So it was very much a first for me, I'd say.
So then after there, you go to college in Boston.
Mm-hmm.
So now we're back up and now across the country. You went to Tufts.
Yeah.
And while you were in college, you go to Guatemala.
Mm-hmm.
All right.
Yeah.
So had this whole mindset of doing things in the social good realm, had that always been with you, or was that something that kind of was spurred in the Brazil trip? Or
So I would tie it back to Brazil. When I went to Tufts University in Boston, I studied international relations, and actually always thought that I would end up in international aid and development. I never really was the type of person who thought I would become an entrepreneur. And went down to Guatemala, where I was working on a fair trade organic coffee farm. It was actually this really interesting experiment in peace building, which was that the farm was composed of 36 families who were all ex-guerrilla fighters from the Civil War. So basically what happened is in 1996, when the internal armed conflict ended, they exchanged their weapons for land from the government, pooled it together, and then built this fair trade cooperative that was selling coffee to the fair trade market.
what did that teach you about entrepreneurship, seeing these people doing it at such a true grassroots
Yeah,
level?
so it was a really interesting learning experience for me in the sense that on the one hand, I saw a lot of the international aid that was the world that I thought I wanted to go into, and how problematic sometimes these macro level solutions can be when they're implemented from a very top-down perspective, versus some of the families on this farm who were just totally entrepreneurial by nature and building things kind of grassroots innovations up. And so that was kind of what started to get me thinking about entrepreneurship. While I was down there, I actually worked with 3 of the families to build a business plan for an ecotourism program where they would actually take tourists to come visit the coffee farm, share the story, their experience of the internal armed conflict, and then kind of show their entrance into the fair trade coffee market.
And also just working in simple tools like Google Maps and stuff to
Yeah.
them. I mean, was there internet access down there?
Oh, no. No, that's a great question. We went to computer labs all the time to get on the internet, and we actually ended up helping them build a computer lab.
Oh, wow. So what was the reaction? Just had, you know, people who used to be guerrilla fighters, now they're suddenly entrepreneurs themselves. How much thought had they put into a business plan in terms of being sustainable, or were they receiving help, or was that what you were there for?
So very little thought ahead of time with the business plan. I think, um, a lot of times in these cases, a lot of people just really have this entrepreneurial pulse inside of them, and they will build a business without ever having been taught what a business plan should look like. That works for some people, obviously not everyone, and it also has kind of a limit. So when we went down there, part of what I was doing was actually taking how they were already operating and then turning that into a business plan with an actual strategy and helping them think through what is marketing and what should this actually look like given the types of customers we want to attract to this offering.
And you mentioned you started seeing some of the problems with international aid from a macro level. What were those problems, and what kind of thing did that spark in your mind?
Good question. So one of the big things that I saw was, so this was a really small community. It was 36 families, and it was created in 1996. And I went down there in 2008, and over that span of time, because of how some of these families were able to access capital or sell to the fair trade market, there was this tremendous skewing in wealth dynamics and power in this community. And if that's going to happen in 12 short years, that was kind of a signal to me that this could be something that's just like really, really problematic for these communities that are being reconstructed after extended periods of conflict. So that at that point, I really started to question: is international aid really an effective way of driving social change from the lens that I cared about?
Was it successful? I mean, the plan you were working on, not necessarily international aid, but are they still there today? Are those coffee farms still thriving? Or?
Yeah, they are. I actually, so one of my friends who I went down there with, who was doing research with me, he actually has ended up in Jordan, where he's working at a refugee camp. But he is Guatemalan himself, so he's going back down to the farm this summer for the first time in a long time, since 2008 for both of us.
Cool. All right, so after Guatemala, you then entered our realm of media. And,
Yes.
Joined a documentary filmmaking team
I did.
in Bolivia.
So my thought at that point was, all right, international aid, that might not be my thing. I'm going to do documentary filmmaking. I learned that is not my thing. I have so much respect for you guys. I went down.
So those of you who change your mind every single day on what you want to do, we have a success story right here of someone who.
Yeah. I have so much respect for you guys. I went down to Bolivia. I was there for about 2 months doing this, basically a study abroad program that was based in ethnographic documentary filmmaking. With a friend who was also down there, we did a very short film on mining culture in Bolivia and how that was affected by kind of colonialism and how that was kind of threaded throughout the mining culture.
What didn't you like about it?
I do not have the attention to detail that it takes. I like to move fast, and editing, you cannot move fast.
All right, so Bolivia was a no-go, but
Love Bolivia.
Okay, you at least enjoyed your time there.
Yeah.
What you were doing there didn't work. So you go back to college.
Mm-hmm.
So now we're back to Boston, if you're following along on the animated map. And then from there, it's Chile.
Yes.
And you actually, this is where it seems like a lot of the wheels started to start spinning in the way of where you're headed now. And you were working on a project to figure out how people who weren't serviced by government were actually getting gas and water to their property. And what did you find was the answer to that question?
So I went down. I went down there to look at these squatter settlements, and I was really interested in what works. Like, how are these networks being formed? How are resources being allocated? And so in this squatter settlement, I was looking at things like water, electricity, and gas. Who has control over distributing those when the state has no power? The answer is what you guys might guess, that a local mafia controls everything. And they control everything from the resources in that community to illegal trade to also building a playground for the kids in that community. So they were simultaneously this benevolent force in the community and also really, really negative force in the community, which really confused me, but was also demonstrated to me kind of the nuance of working in the world of social change, how there are so many factors going on that you need to account for.
Yeah, so if any of y'all watch Narcos on Netflix, it's the exact Pablo Escobar model of do all the good in the community and everyone will love you no matter what you're doing that they don't know of. So what did your time in Chile teach you about that networking? How did it kind of change your mindset of how to get problems solved, especially when you're now dealing with the mob or the mafia?
Yes. I would say one of the, well, part of what I learned while in Chile and what was so important was how significant it is to build buy-in and trust from the communities that you're working with. The only reason that I was able to go into this community is because I found a local arts organization that was not a part of the mafia, that had done a lot of good work in this community. And I spent several months actually working with them in the community center outside of the squatter settlement before they took me into the community. And they were with me for the first month every time I went there. And I think when you're entering a new community as someone who is an outsider, it's really critical that you have local buy-in from folks who are willing to kind of chaperone you.
Yeah, and what was the response to these squatter communities? Were they acceptive of you or?
Skeptical, I would say. Skeptical, curious. The kids were very curious. The families wanted to understand what I was doing, of course. One of the big issues that comes up in the world of aid and development is how long are you staying here for? Because a lot of people will go, at least a lot of aid will go into a community and sometimes, or at least historically, comes with these top-down solutions and says, we're going to solve your problems. They stay there for a year and then they leave. And the reality is that these communities are going to be there ongoing. And so if you don't build that buy-in locally, if you don't look at the solutions that the people in those communities are coming up with themselves, you're not going to have the longevity with these solutions.
So all this happened while you were still in college,
Yes.
correct?
Yes.
So this is how you were spending your college years, traveling throughout South America.
I would probably say I spent about half my time at college, actually at college.
Okay, so now we're going back to Boston. You graduate.
Yes.
We're now back at our third trip back to Boston. And then from there, we're moving on to Argentina as part of a fellowship through Princeton, correct? And what were you originally planning to do there and what ended up happening when you got there?
So this is actually a very little told story because I went down to Argentina to work with a group that was doing entrepreneurship education. And I was supposed to work for this guy, Gustavo Januso. I get to Argentina, and my second day down there, Gustavo sits me down and he says, well, the program that you moved down here to run for the next year didn't get our grant renewed. So it's going to shut down in 3 weeks. I had bought a one-way ticket down to Argentina. This was supposed to be my first job out of college. And all of a sudden it was going to evaporate in 18 days, or 21 days rather. So in my mind, I was like, all right, I have got to figure out something to do in the next 3 weeks that lines up with this fellowship program and is also something that I'm interested in doing. So I basically had 3 weeks of scrambling, and then also one of the most accelerated learning experiences of my life. Gustavo, as he was exiting this organization that he had built, was running for mayor of Bariloche. And so I basically trailed him on his campaign trail, which was going through the squatter settlements of this town that we were living in, sitting in people's kitchens, listening to what they wanted to see for their community, and translating that into policy. I also started to spend some time with his wife, who ran an organization that worked with child laborers and their families, and ended up seeing this gap in her organization that I thought I could fill with the skill set that I had that I was interested in doing. So 3 weeks in, I ended up pitching to her to set up basically a very small scale social venture with the mothers of these child laborers that would provide them employment, was in line with the work that they were doing with kids who were working in the trash dumps, or actually rather getting the kids out of the trash dump, of course. And
What were they building? What were the?
so the mothers, what we ended up creating were grocery bags out of recycled materials. So it directly lined up with the resources that were available in those communities, and then we sold them in local grocery stores. It was pretty small scale. I think we had 8 women total who were a part of it. And then alongside that, we built a partnership with a bank that operates throughout Latin America and Africa and did microcredit. So these are very small scale loans to help people start up small scale businesses, kind of like mom and pop shop type stuff. And so I ended up running those 2 programs for the next year. Luckily, my fellowship program totally accepted it when I made the phone call and told them, well, my job doesn't exist anymore, but actually I have this other one.
And I know you had the business plans for the Colombian farmers, but was this your actual first time putting something into motion?
Yeah, it was. And it was the first time that I was entirely responsible for getting something off the ground. I learned a lot just in terms of what it takes, especially with the lens and mindset of what I was mentioning earlier, that I knew I was going to be here for a year. So whatever I built had to be sustained in the long term by these 8 women who we were planning on employing. So alongside actually building the business itself, there was also the sustainability factor of who of these 8 women is actually going to lead this venture after I left.
When I talk to some of my entrepreneur friends, the one thing they all say is when you're starting, the hardest thing is knowing that other people's lives are depending on your decisions. Did that seem even more of a factor down there, knowing that not just their careers, but actually probably their lives were depending on you at that moment? Did you ever stop and think about that? Or?
Yeah, I'm getting anxiety just remembering that right now. Yeah, that is hands down just like it's what I think about today too. It's incredibly stressful to think about the fact that these are people whose livelihoods depend on you. And not only that, but I was in this community where the goal of employing these women wasn't just to provide them employment, but it was to create an income stream for their families so their kids would no longer have to work in the trash dumps.
Was this the first time that the light bulb turned on with, yeah, I think I can accomplish both those goals here, social good and a sustainable business model?
Yeah, I would say so. It was the first time I ever looked to the world of entrepreneurship as a way to solve social problems. And it was one, through building this venture, but 2, working with Elena, who is the founder of this organization. And they're a nonprofit organization, but she is just one of the most entrepreneurial people I have ever met. And I don't think she ever studied business, but she is just one of those people that business schools write case studies about. The way she operates was just incredible. And because I was working one-on-one beside her for the full year, by the end of that time, I was just like, I don't care what you want to call these people, social entrepreneurs or what, but these are the people that we need to be backing. This is what change is driven by.
Yeah, we had Evan Smith comes to campus quite a bit, the CEO of the Texas Tribune. He's always said that even though they're a nonprofit, there's nothing wrong with making money.
Sure.
That's
absolutely.
When you're dealing with people who have no idea with a business mindset, teaching them that might be a hard thing to do.
It is, and I think depending on the country, there are, I would say, different cultural mindsets about whether a nonprofit is charitably funded, meaning it raises all donations and grants, or whether a nonprofit is actually operating off of earned income, which I think is we're going to see much more of in the future. And in Argentina, that was just Elena's default. That was just how she knew to run her business.
Okay, so sorry.
No, go ahead.
Okay, so now complete right turn in your path, literally.
Yes.
We're now heading to India, and we're now kind of getting into the home stretch of where you are today. What made you want to go to India, first of all?
So while I was down in Argentina, Elena was just this tremendous mentor for me. And she knew that I was interested in social entrepreneurship, so was coaching me throughout the year on this, but like any good mentor, eventually kicked me out of the nest. and said, listen, you're incredibly young in your career. If you want to really understand this space, you need to understand more social business models than ours. And India is really on the forefront of social entrepreneurship and impact investing for a couple reasons. One, it's just such an innovative entrepreneurial culture by nature. Two, the need there is tremendous. The levels of poverty in India are hugely significant. And then three, there's a lot of capital that is being deployed from the United States and Europe into India and Asian markets in the world of impact investing. Some of it is being guaranteed or to an extent subsidized by grant capital, for instance, from USAID. But as a result, the pool of impact investing capital has started in the world of Asia before coming back here to the US.
So what type of projects were being funded in India while you were there?
So I moved to India to work with Unlimited India, which is the model we've replicated here in Austin. And I worked with one woman named Ujwala, and it was really interesting the types of entrepreneurs we worked with because Ujwala grew up in the slums. She dropped out of school when she was about 12 years old. And when I met her, she was operating Barefoot Slums, which is a acupuncture clinic that operates in slums and rural villages as a way to treat chronic pain. And if you're thinking about the people who her market that she was serving, they are making less than $1 or $2 a day. So even if they are suffering from pain or some kind of injury that acupuncture could treat, they're never going to go to a hospital. They're not going to spend their money on that. But if you think about the setup cost for a hospital relative to a acupuncture clinic, which is literally just a flat table and new fresh needles for each patient, it's you can't even compare them. So she was able to scale this pretty quickly throughout the slums and then also build them inside the slums as opposed to outside. She was one example. Another example is a woman named Akanksha, who is the founder of Mpani. And in contrast to someone like Ujwala, who never studied business, Akanksha went to Princeton. She got her MBA from Oxford. So she's learned about business in some very elite institutions. And she moved to India to start her company, which basically worked as a loyalty program for people who are topping up on their cell phone in the slums. So the way this works in India is you'll buy more and more credit for your cell phone instead of having an ongoing plan. So you're earning points for this. And then she set up her company so that you would trade those reward points for clean water or education classes or healthcare. So it's directly incentivizing people to, based on a behavior that they're already doing, which is buying more credit for their cell phone, to actually allocate those savings towards social impact products.
Was there a culture shock moving from South and Latin America to India?
Oh yeah. I don't know. Have any of you guys been to India or any of you from India? It is wild. I loved it. I would say there are probably maybe like 70% of expats who move to India really, really struggle there, and 30% really, really thrive. I was definitely in the 30%. I loved it. I was personally responsible for 3 of my friends moving to India who ended up being in the 70%. So I have some points to win back with them. But you adapt to every place. You can adapt to anywhere, but it's the way I describe Mumbai to people is just, it's the intersection of all polar opposites. You have tradition and modernity. You have Western markets and Indian markets. It's poverty and extreme wealth. It's just bringing everything into this one giant megalopolis.
And so you were only supposed to be there a year, right? So
less, actually.
Okay.
I think it was 6 months that I was supposed to be in India. At Unlimited India, I felt like I found my people. A month into my job there, I ended up going to my manager and asked her for a full-time permanent job. She was very gracious and told me that I should actually make sure I enjoyed living in India before making that commitment. So I ended up, this was as part of a fellowship program, so I had several other peers, most of whom were American, who were also at fellowship positions. After 6 months, they all went home. I stayed full-time at this organization. And then about a year in, I ended up thinking about what it would look like to bring this model back to the US.
And how old were you at this time?
That,
Mid 20s, somewhere around there?
yeah, I guess that would be 24.
Okay, so all of this travel had been funded by fellowships or grants or stuff
Yeah.
like that. So it's entirely possible to go around the world and do great things and have somebody else pay for it.
It is totally true. I did not pay for any of this. There is grant funding out there. You've definitely got to search for it, but all of this was through grants, fellowships, scholarships. It's out there if you are willing to search for it.
So you mentioned now that you're starting to think, hey, I think this could translate to the United States. What was missing here that you thought you could fill the need for when you were trying to come up with that plan?
That was a good question. So the way I approached this was while I was in India, I just decided to start exploring, all right, Unlimited is a model that we know works in multiple markets. It actually was first developed in the UK nearly 15 years ago, and they're pretty massive in size. They've funded 20,000 social entrepreneurs till date, but it started in the UK. They've had this really interesting experience in terms of how they've scaled globally, which is that they haven't intended to. Rather, they had people from other countries work at Unlimited and then say, hey, I want to see this program in my country. So that happened in South Africa, that happened in India, that happened in Thailand. All of the founders of those organizations were working at Unlimited UK. I kind of had the same experience myself, but really did not know what the world of impact investing looked like here in the US. And I guess I should stop and clarify maybe what I mean by impact investing and social entrepreneurship. So in this world, this is entrepreneurs who are building a business model with a paying customer that will create social change. So going back to the example of Ujwala and Barefoot Slums, they actually had these people paying a small amount for the acupuncture sessions, and then they also ran a cross-subsidy model. So they had a higher-end acupuncture clinic that would service customers who would pay higher amounts to subsidize the clinics in the slums. So an impact investor is an investor who is going to make an investment into a social enterprise. They will expect a financial return just as you would with any company, but alongside that financial return, they're going to expect positive social gains like improved healthcare, access to education, things like that.
And what's the ratio on that? Are they?
It totally depends.
Yeah.
What's really interesting, because impact investing is incredibly new. This whole space has been around for maybe 20 years, which is very, very young. So the verdict is definitely still out on what this will look like. And if you guys run into impact investors, the first question you should ask them are, what are the exits that you point to? Because there are very few. Where this is kind of a big question that everyone is wondering is, what do the exits in social enterprise actually look like? What's encouraging to me is that there's recently been a movement of families of high net worth individuals who have decided to allocate 100% of their assets to impact. So typically, in the past, the way charitable foundations have been set up, let's say you have a charitable foundation that has $30 million in assets. In order to maintain their status, what they have to do is take 5% of that 30 million and make grants. That's traditionally how it's operated. How an impact investor might look at this is, and then the other 95% is invested to grow the endowment. How an impact investor might look at that is say, okay, we're gonna do these 5% as grants, but within this 95%, we're gonna look for impact, we're gonna look for investment opportunities that also align with impact. So 100% of this 30 million is actually out in the world doing good, and this 95% is going to make us a financial return and help us grow the endowment. I know that's a lot of technical stuff, so if you guys have questions, feel free to jump in at any point, I should say.
We'll open it up to questions here in just a little bit. What were your fears and concerns bringing this model to the United States? Because I guess the first question was, where are you going to do this?
Yeah, my fears and concerns, everything. Where am I going to do this? So going back to the original question, what I did was get on the phone with social entrepreneurs here in the US pretty much every single night after work. So I was sitting in my flat in Mumbai, sweating on Skype calls that kept cutting in and out, just trying to understand what does this world look like in the United States? I did that for 2 months and then just kind of kicked myself and thought, why am I not just talking to people face to face back in the US? So what I ended up doing was doing a crowdfunding campaign to organize this month-long series of events where we went to 8 different cities across the United States. We partnered with local co-working spaces and then hosted half-day boot camps for social entrepreneurs in each of these cities. So what this allowed us to do was understand what kind of social entrepreneurs exist in the United States. It gave us face time with these entrepreneurs so we could talk to them and understand who are the impact investors in your city. And then along the way, we got kind of to my point earlier about getting local buy-in and leadership. It allowed us to make connections with local leaders in each of these cities to understand, is unlimited actually a model that makes sense in your city? And of those 8, it didn't make sense in some of these cities. In San Francisco, it didn't. In New York, it didn't. Just because those cities were so saturated with other accelerators. In a city like Charleston, it also didn't make sense just because we didn't actually see enough social entrepreneurs to support a program like ours.
So you're saying we, how many people were actually involved in the process of getting it started?
So this road trip was a pretty ragtag group. It was myself, the 2 co-founders of Unlimited India, one of whom is Indian, one of whom is a Brit, and then a 4th who was a Thai entrepreneur who was just really interested in learning the impact investing space as well, a friend of ours while we were in India. So the 4 of us did this trip. That was kind of just a scoping trip, I would say. I moved to Austin in February 2014, and at that point, I was the only person on the team.
Yeah. And why Austin? What made you pick that out of the 8 cities you
Good question. The breakfast tacos. No, Austin was actually a pretty clear choice for us. What we saw in Austin were the types of entrepreneurs that we were looking for. One of the things that I'll push any entrepreneur to think about when they are starting a new business is what is the first critical assumption that you need to test that if you don't get this right, everything falls apart. And for us, if we couldn't find entrepreneurs, everything would fall apart. So that was one piece. The second piece was local leadership who was actually pulling us to Austin. So I would point to folks like Dan Graham, who's the CEO of Build a Sign in Austin. He really advocated for us to come. Steve Wanta, who was the program director of Whole Planet Foundation, he was a huge supporter of us coming and opened up a lot of doors for us to talk to investors. And then the third piece was just that there was this massive gap in Austin. Up until we launched 2 years ago, there was no publicly facing institutional investor for for-profit social enterprises. So there's a lot of philanthropic foundations working with nonprofits. There's a lot of, increasing amounts of venture capital, but no one bridging those gaps.
So as you mentioned now, about 2 years here in Austin. So what's the process like if somebody has an idea, a business plan, and they want to go through Unlimited USA?
Good question. Yeah, so the way our model works is we have two sides to it. One is search and selection, and the other is venture support. Search and selection is how we find our entrepreneurs. We basically do a big call out to entrepreneurs with our scouting network, and then they go through a process where they will fill out an online application, which will prompt them with a lot of questions about what kind of problem do they want to solve, what is the business model that will drive it, how much progress have they made. We take them through this process and ultimately have them pitch to a final selection panel of local impact investors, funders, and entrepreneurs themselves.
So you're looking for people who have already started down this road, not just somebody with a big idea.
Yes, we're pretty early stage. I would say we're about as early as any funder would come in, and that's actually a role that we like to play, to be the first funder, which is pretty rare. Not many funders really love playing that role because it's pretty high risk. That said, I think it's a pretty important role for someone to play.
So what are you looking for in an entrepreneur?
To start, it just starts with the individual. Is this an individual who we believe in, who is committed to the social problem that they're talking about? One of the tools or frameworks that we use at Unlimited is called effectuation, which are 5 behaviors of the world's most effective entrepreneurs. And this has come out of Darden Business School, but it is basically instead of, if you think of an entrepreneur as what they need to know versus how they behave, we feel like it is much low risk to invest in someone who knows how to problem solve as opposed to someone who knows the information, because you can never really predict what kinds of problems you'll run into as an entrepreneur. And if we see someone who is able to pull in resources to what they're doing, who knows who to involve in their work, how to evaluate affordable loss, that's to us someone we want to invest in.
I'm going to open it up to questions here in just a minute, so start getting ready for that. Let's talk about what they get when you select an entrepreneur. We mentioned seed funding, one-on-one mentoring.
Yeah.
How hands-on are y'all with getting them off the ground and running?
So I'm not sure if you guys are familiar with accelerator programs, something like Techstars, but we're a blend between an accelerator program and a fellowship. So what that means for us is that we work with our entrepreneurs for a full year. The first 3 months is what looks like a typical accelerator with mentor events. We have a mentor network of about 50 to 60 folks in Austin. And those 3 months are basically designed to be kind of putting our entrepreneurs in front of the fire hose of meeting everyone who can be helpful to them in Austin. These are successful entrepreneurs who can share kind of the hard-earned wisdom. These are investors who actually have the capital to help them grow their businesses. These are industry experts who know the ins and outs of the industries that our entrepreneurs are operating in. The backbone of this is what we call venture support, which looks a lot like portfolio management that an early stage investor would do. And that's in-house on our team. So we have a venture support team who works one-on-one with our entrepreneurs over the course of the full year. And that ranges from everything from business planning and strategy to raising funding to sometimes what we joke about as just therapy for our entrepreneurs.
How much of that is needed?
Oh, a lot. More than anyone would care to admit.
And you said that process is a year. So how many have you gone through? So I guess 2 rounds and you're on the 3rd round now.
Yeah.
What have been some of the social good projects that you've worked with so far?
Yeah, so from cohort 1, we have 10 Acre Organics. They're an agricultural company whose agricultural technologies reduce land and water usage by up to 90%. They are going to be opening up a 10,000 square foot facility that would save 1 million gallons of water in their first year of operations. Peloton U, they blend online university learning with in-person mentorship for working students who are unable to attend a class, and so they've got to take their class online. But one of the big problems with online colleges right now is the dropout rate is so significant, or persistence through. So those are 2 from cohort 1. Cohort 2, we have a portfolio company called Open Arms. They employ refugee women who, typically in Austin would make $8 an hour. They employ them to do textile manufacturing for companies like IKEA. So how many of you guys know Tom's? So that's an example of a social impact brand. If you're an IKEA, you could never have an external brand in your store because everything you have is IKEA brand. So IKEA would hire Meg to create a social impact product line that's branded as IKEA, and they're able to carry that in stores and now compete in the market that Tom's is otherwise competing in.
And the other one you mentioned was Pen Pal Schools. What are they doing?
So Pen Pal Schools is an online technology platform that connects classrooms around the world to do online pen pal exchanges. And it's Joe, who's the CEO and founder of Pen Pal Schools. He is absolutely brilliant the way he's thinking about this. So for instance, they are launching a series of pen pal exchanges that will be between red and blue states during the elections. They're also connecting students in Israel and Palestine to talk about the conflict. So that he's been really smart the way he has actually designed these courses in a way that's interesting, fun, and relevant to the students that they're connecting worldwide.
All right, so let's open it up to questions. If anybody has one, we've got a couple over here. Kelly,
Yeah.
do we have the mic? We'll go right here first, and then we'll work our way back around. Right.
Hi, my name's Jackie.
Hey,
Thanks
Jackie.
for coming to speak with us. And so I was looking through your. Okay. I was looking through your different cohorts for the Austin cohorts, and I noticed that while a lot of them involved like farming and like bringing a lot of the profitability and business to people like within the towns and stuff, I noticed that at least two of them involved data analysis, and I was interested in the fact that those entrepreneurs were looked at with just the same amount of I don't know, profitability, I guess is the right way to say it, as any other. For example, Igar Holes with Mintagram, who does the daily tracking tools for the decision making of the healthcare professionals. She was in cohort 1, and then cohort 2, Paul Albinal. I know I massacred that name. I'm so sorry.
You're close enough.
Who did automatic grading system? How do they do that? I guess that's part of their secret. But I mean, that's really impressive to me that you guys have found entrepreneurs that are even doing things like that on what I think is almost more of like a on a macro level scale. Instead of like the farming that has like one of your things like farming that is saved like 90% of the water or something.
Sure. It's a very astute observation that is something that we're uniquely able to do because of how we're structured right now. Right now, we ourselves are structured as a 501c3, so we actually raise philanthropic capital to take on the early stage risk of these social ventures. In contrast to a venture capital firm, that means that we don't have LPs right now who we're promising returns to. The way our seed funding is structured is that unlimited entrepreneurs who are successful pay their seed funding forward into another unlimited entrepreneur. Part of what our organization is actually looking at is making some larger investments into the entrepreneurs in our cohorts down the line. And in that case, we would have LPs who, the incentive structure there is to make as much of a return as possible for our LPs. And in that case, all of a sudden these tech ventures become increasingly more of a fit for what we look at investing in.
And I would guess it'd just be a case of being different here in the States where we have tech ventures to begin with, whereas in South America, they may not have, those ventures for you to invest in. Or
that's true. I think, in the larger cities, they definitely do. In rural areas, in emerging markets, you wouldn't find that, but I would point to Bogota, Buenos Aires. All these cities have some really exciting emerging tech scenes too.
I had a follow-up question. So I read on your website that you choose 2 entrepreneurs every year to decide whether or not they're fit for your for the whole entire scheme of everything. And I was wondering who takes a part in deciding who is fit and what's not. And I mean, you went over what skills and what things are more attractive to y'all. But really, I'm interested more in knowing like who is it that is
making the decisions.
Yeah, exactly.
So the way it's structured is that in the first part of our search and selection, it is our team up until the actual decision making. So we will go through all of our applicants. We will read through the applications and select semifinalists who we will invite in for interviews. Of those semifinalists, we'll do deeper due diligence on them and come up with finalists. And once we get to the round of finalists, we take those to essentially what is an investment committee and say, these are entrepreneurs that our team wants to back. We create one-page kind of investment briefs, and then the people on the final selection panel, they are actually the ones who recommend back to us who should be a part of the cohort. Part of the decision-making behind that is so that we know, because we invite funders and investors to sit on that panel, we know that there are also funders who are interested in those deals, so there's follow-on capital that is likely to be invested into these entrepreneurs if they go through our program. So examples of the types of folks who were there last time, Jason Seitz, who's a partner at Techstars Ventures, Mike Nellis, who's the CEO of Austin Community Foundation, which just launched an impact fund. Let's see, Aaron Gray, who's the CEO of Amp Bertha, which is one of Austin's, I would say, kind of darling social enterprises.
How long did it take to get into that community to bring those people in to be part of your organization, even if from,
That's a good question. I was actually very surprised that I think Austin has a particular culture of openness and giving you a shot if you're willing to put in the hard work. Jason Seats, he's actually on our board at Unlimited. I met him probably 4 months into moving into Austin, brought him onto our advisory board 8 months in, and then brought him onto our board maybe a year in.
So it was something you put the effort in almost
Oh
right
yeah,
away when you
yeah.
were there.
I would say my first 6 months in Austin, like my full-time job was having like pretty much 8 meetings a day. It was exhausting. And I was definitely very addicted to coffee.
All right, we have a question back there.
Yeah.
Hello. So you just kind of spoke a little bit more to it, but you said when you arrived in Austin, you were kind of a one-woman show. Could you just speak a little bit more on how Unlimited in Austin grew? I know you're basing off
Yeah.
of the model, but just kind of speak to that a little bit.
Yeah. So when I moved to Austin, I knew one person who was the co-captain of my high school soccer team. So no one who should really give us a shot at building this organization here in Austin. What I did was I went back to the entrepreneurs who I had met in this month-long series of events, and I went back to the local leadership. And I basically laid out, our plan is to run the search and selection process 8 months from now. Who are the entrepreneurs you think I should talk to? So I basically prioritized for the first 3 months meeting entrepreneurs in order to be able to build the case to funders that there was actually a pipeline of entrepreneurs. Meanwhile, of course, I was looking to build our team. So I brought on our first team member through a program called Frontier Market Scouts, which trains young professionals in the world of impact investing and then places them with operating partners on ground. So she actually came to us through a fellowship program. I brought on our venture partner. I recruited him actually from Oxford, where he and I had actually connected while I was still in India because he was looking at going back to the US. He's from Louisiana. He was looking at going back to the US and getting into impact investing, so some friends put us in touch. And our first call, it was a horrible call, but he asked me the hardest questions of anyone I met on this month-long road trip. So when I moved back to Austin, I was like, I need to get Mark involved. So I ended up recruiting him to join us originally it was a 3-month gig, and he's been with us for about almost 2 years at this point. And we're a small team right now. We're 4 people, so we won't grow too much in terms of our team size, but that's kind of the story of how I met them. Alongside meeting entrepreneurs in Austin, I knew that the other critical thing was building our network of mentors and investors. So every meeting I sat down in, I asked, who are the next entrepreneurs I should meet? What other investors do you know here in Austin who would be interested in social enterprises?
And Zoe's not kidding about going from meeting to meeting. When we were getting in touch to talk before this, she was like, I'm available from 1:10 to 1:20, from 2:15 to 2:20.
It's a pretty
Yeah,
busy life.
I can only imagine how many meetings. We have a question back there.
Yes. Going off of all the audiences or people you had to speak to, entrepreneurs here in the U.S., is there any way you would consider, or rather, is there an opportunity there for another team to open up in the United States? Are you looking forward to seeing someone meeting those qualifications and another team that you can work with and possibly crowdfund even more?
Definitely. We're thinking about that all the time. I think one of my big questions over the last 2 years is what kind of pipeline of entrepreneurs exists just in Austin? And probably what we'll end up doing for our 4th cohort is instead of doing our call for applicants in Austin, do it nationwide and try to recruit companies to come to Austin. At the same time, kind of without my prompting, I've had cities from across the country reach out to me and ask, can we set up an Unlimited in Denver, in Minneapolis? So our hope would be to actually set up programs in those cities as well. Again, the questions that come to my mind is there a pipeline of entrepreneurs to support the program? And is there enough local capital that's actually interested in funding these entrepreneurs? I think it's, to an extent, a disservice to run a program where you have great entrepreneurial talent, but the local capital is just not ready for this space, which is the truth in some places because it's such an unproven industry. But overall, I think there's huge opportunity to be supporting social enterprises, particularly in cities between the coasts. I think it's incredibly undertapped, and we're going to see a lot more coming out of it.
How do you think you just hit the jackpot with Austin? I mean, perfect timing with tons of money, tons of entrepreneurial spirit.
Austin has been like the best place I think we could have launched. I think the speed with which we've been able to get this program off the ground has, quite frankly, really surprised me that we could back 3 cohorts in less than 2 years. That said, I think one of the things I say to a lot of the funders in Austin is that the capital is actually pretty slow to move there. And I mean, our organization, we're about 70% funded by sources of capital outside of Austin, which is ironic for a program that is about Austin social entrepreneurs, many of whom are having social impact in Austin. It's antithetical. So I think there's space to improve in that sense, but there's no way we could have gotten this program off the ground in another city so quickly.
We have a question right here.
Okay. First off, thank you for coming to speak with us. I have a two-parter. One part, so your whole journey has been so inspiring from college up until today. So the first part, what tips do you have for, young entrepreneurs like us potentially for writing business plans and taking your ideas from your brain to paper, essentially?
So I would just say get started. The story that I told you of how I ended up here in Austin and all these journeys that I went on, I can paint the story backwards about why that all makes sense, that we would now be able to build this organization, but I can also paint all of those as failures as well. 2 months spent in Bolivia on a career path that is entirely unrelated to what I'm doing right now, but I've been able to kind of stitch in lessons. Moving down to Argentina for a job that did not exist 3 weeks later. A lot of these are failures as well. So I think if you can get over that fear of failure, getting started is going to teach you so much more than preparation really could to a certain extent. And I would say, Tufts was a great university and I learned such a tremendous amount there. And alongside that, I think some of my greatest teachers were, the ex-guerrilla fighters that I met down in Argentina, Ujwala, who dropped out of school and taught me what it looks like to actually build a business, even if you don't have that formal education. So I think, and that one of my favorite quotes is from a woman named Debbie Millman, and she says something along the lines of, imagine immensities, don't compromise, don't wait to get started. So I think I would give that advice to anyone.
You hear that a lot too, but you are what your past experiences make you.
Mhm.
Going through some of those failures along the way oftentimes strengthen you more than a success could. Kelly, I think we have a couple over here. Kelly's playing the role of Phil Donahue today. None of the students know who Phil Donahue is, but that's okay.
So my name is Jonathan Borgiani, and thanks so much for coming and talking. It's been really interesting. You're like the new missionaries. Instead of spreading religion, you're spreading good capitalism. So I think that's really awesome. So one thing that kept coming up in everything you talked about was income inequality.
Mm-hmm.
So my question is and you said you went around with Gustavo and saw his campaign and everything. How do you see that going in America? A lot of people here would say that income inequality is a big, big problem. Some say it's getting worse. Some say it's getting better. What do you think a good answer for that could be? And how is government really affecting it? Should the government take a bigger role?
That is a great question. I wish I had a full answer to it. I think a lot of people wish they had a full answer to it, but I think that is going to be one of the biggest challenges our generation is going to face, which is this the widening gap of income inequality. And it's something that is not just on the mind of philanthropic foundations that are created to do good in the world, but also the world of venture capital. For example, Y Combinator, which is another accelerator program, they're based in San Francisco. They just put out a call for a researcher to research basic income over the course of 5 years. And that's something that you can look to Scandinavian countries for what examples of government in that space looks like. But I think especially given the innovation that's happening, I guess my biggest fear would be that as innovation progresses, several jobs are actually going to be eliminated. And if that's the case, what is the solution for an increased unemployment rate? And that's why I think there are a lot of questions about basic income. But alongside that, I think there's a role for government. I think there's a role for businesses to have sustainable hiring practices to make sure that they're also looking towards groups that struggle to find employment. As an example, in the White House 7 years ago launched what's called the White House Social Innovation Fund. And alongside impact investing, they have what's called a pay for success model. And the way that works is that a private investor will find a proven solution for a social problem. So let's say there is a program for people coming out of the prison system to get them employed. And if you're able to keep someone out of prison during this first 6-month window, the likelihood that they'll go back to prison significantly decreases. So if you can come up with a successful intervention in that time, it is actually a tremendous cost saving to the state because it decreases the number of people in prison. So the way a pay for success model works is that they will fund an intervention in those 6 months. If that intervention is able to hit social impact targets, like the number of people making it through that program, then the government will actually pay back the investor and they'll actually make a return on their initial investment. So that's the type of example that to an extent gets to that, but is also going to drive more sustainable hiring practices as well as we get these people into sustainable jobs. That was kind of a very roundabout answer that touched on a lot of pieces, but all really interesting things to explore. I would say if you're interested in income inequality, I think the most interesting debates will play out around basic income.
And so just one other thing, it's kind of a follow-up to that. You said 7 years ago, so that was whenever the Democrats had the House and executive office.
Mm-hmm.
They passed such an awesome program. So just wanted to point that out.
Yeah, the Social Innovation Fund is really innovative. It's unlocking a lot of capital in this space. It's pretty experimental, but I think it's really exciting.
I think so too.
There's a question right here.
First of all, thanks for joining us and taking time out of your day to be here and share your experiences. On a less serious note, what's your favorite place to get breakfast tacos in Austin?
Oh man. Okay, so I most frequently go to Maizos Tacos because it's right next to our co-working space. But my favorite place is Veracruz. So the best place, and I take every friend who comes to visit me, is Radio Coffee because they have coffee, kombucha on tap, and beer, and a Veracruz taco truck. It is the happiest place in Austin.
You mentioned co-working space, so you're a big supporter of that.
Yeah.
Y'all know what co-working spaces are. So why don't you explain a little bit of
Sure.
your day-to-day operation there at Unlimited?
So we have a small team, of course, 4 people. So we don't actually have our own office. We work out of a co-working space, which is basically a big shared space for lots of smaller companies. It's incredibly beneficial because through my co-working space, I've met funders, I've met our graphic designer, I've met our accountant, I have met startups that have gone through our program. I have been able to refer our startups to go through other programs. So it's kind of a way to, it's a low cost way to cover rent for a startup and allows you to connect with other businesses and partners that you'll be working with.
Question right here.
Once again, thank you for coming here to speak with us. I got two questions for you. I'll give you a softball one first, which is you seem to be all over South America. What is your favorite place? I mean, city, landmark, natural site, whatever. And second question is, you say with your startups, when y'all invest in them, the ones that succeed, they return their investment, invest in the next line of them. Where do y'all actually cover your overhead? You know, the small cost of doing everything on a daily basis. How do you calculate that and take it out of the
So what's your
process?
business model?
Both good questions. Favorite place? I actually went to Colombia for the first time over New Year's this year, just for fun, not for work or anything, and I loved it. I can actually imagine a world in maybe 10, 15 years where I end up doing something in impact investing in Colombia. In terms of covering our costs, since we're structured as a 501c3, right now we raise grant funding, which covers both the seed funding that we disperse and our operational expenses. As we move into a new business model and a new structure and raise investment capital for a fund, that would cover our operational expenses. So the way, I don't know if you guys have studied the way funds are structured at all, but the way that works is that you raise money from a bunch of LPs, and then it's called a 2 and 20 model, where 2% of whatever size fund you raise covers your management fee, which are your operational expenses. And then once you start harvesting returns, 80% of that goes back out to your LPs, and then 20% goes back to the team. So that's what we would be looking at in the future. Right now, we're able to raise all of this through philanthropic capital. I think that is has been fine for the first 2 years, but is not something I'm interested in into perpetuity.
Hi, I'm Cassie Arredondo. Nice to meet you. Thanks for coming. I had a question about the kinds of social issues that you guys personally do. Y'all have like an agenda as far as like what kinds of social issues you want to back, or is it just any that come to you and seem most profitable? Or
That is a good question. So we have pretty extensively built out the criteria that we look at. We tend to be very wide-ranging in terms of the type of social impact we can support, but generally what we look at is this a solution that will either benefit a historically marginalized group, so that would be something like Open Arms, which employs refugee women, or is it going to be something that is going to benefit society at large, and that tends to be where our environmental ventures fall under the equation. In this space, most funders end up with a pretty niche focus, but we're very wide-ranging. I think the limiting factor for us tends to be not necessarily the social issue, but is it actually an entrepreneurial approach towards social change? So I don't think I answered your question very well, but we have a pretty significant rubric built out in terms of, is it minority groups? Is it low-income groups? Are they disabled? Is it refugees? I'm actually personally very passionate about working with refugees. I think it's going to be increasingly a problem we as a global community can't ignore. Globally, there are 60 million people who are displaced because of conflict and typically unable to access jobs, resources, anything in the societies that they're forced to move to. I'm sure you guys are paying attention to what's going on in Syria, but that's one thing that I think there's a solution that's driven by entrepreneurship, but I think there's also a major role for governments to play there that I don't think they're yet stepping up to play.
John, did
I
you
got a
have
quick question.
Yeah.
Your title is still, it's Unlimited USA.
Mm-hmm.
And you said a lot of that came from Unlimited India. Is that right?
Yeah.
Do you still have direct connections with them and kind of?
Yeah, I do. So personally, Pooja Warrior, who is the CEO of Unlimited India, is a mentor and advisor of ours at Unlimited USA. As Unlimited UK kind of saw this organic outgrowth of their model in other countries, they realized they should probably kind of rein that in a little bit and actually build a model around it. So alongside my work at Unlimited, I'm also on the advisory board of the Global Social Entrepreneurship Network, which is a network of organizations like Unlimited, but not just Unlimited's, all around the world who are doing funding and support for early stage social entrepreneurs. I think we're in 53, we have members in 53 countries, but it's a peer-driven network around sharing models, operational models, financing models, going after bids together for funding. And that's one of the ways that the global Unlimited network is tied in.
Of all the projects you've been a part of from, college all the way to now, which one are you most proud of?
Oh, that's a great question. I get, the easy answer would be Unlimited USA, just because I've poured more blood, sweat, and tears into that than anything else. I think what I was most proud of, though, would probably be working with the mothers in Argentina. It was just a phenomenally under-resourced community, and in the course of a year, it started working. It was viable. They had an income stream. And then what I was most excited about is Doña Vilma. She actually stepped up and became essentially the CEO of that company after I left. So I think that was unlikely to have happened and really cool.
And it's generational too, because it was affecting the kids.
Exactly,
Yeah.
exactly.
I think we have another question.
Jonathan again. My question is, what is the biggest sacrifice you had to make throughout your entire journey that you'd have to say people should know about beforehand before getting into this type of business? Because it seems like you are all over the place, and for someone with such an active lifestyle, that's has to be your true calling.
Yeah.
Could be
So-
personal
You can't
relationships.
have a dog.
I may try. I may try. Well, let's see. I would say the biggest sacrifice, I guess, up until moving to Austin was I actually didn't really have a home where I was rooted. I basically would move to another country and start from square one again, constructing a community, building a home, building my life all over again in those communities. I think, I guess sacrifice I'm really kind of struggling with. But the thing that you should know is that if you do this type of thing, it's the type of thing that you have to really enjoy operating in a space of ambiguity. That goes for moving to new countries and exploring new cultures. That goes for building a business. Because the truth is, building a business, you don't have answers for what things will look like 90 days from today. And yet you still have to paint this big 5-year vision and build as if you know that things will look like you imagine them to look like 5 years down the road. So if you're the type of person who thrives in certainty, in structure, in rigid guidelines, I think coming into a company or a startup a few years down the road is probably a better fit. If you're the type of person who thinks about just throwing yourself into an environment where you don't know any of the operating rules and want to create something from that and organize things, then I think it can be a really fun fit. And I love operating in the space of ambiguity. I just love having more questions than answers around me and being in pursuit of answers.
Yeah, you have to have a certain
Yeah.
mindset of, someone who enjoys being home 17 hours a day is probably not going to live the life you live.
Yes, that's true. And in terms of traveling, isn't a term, but I'm definitely a cultural extrovert. I just love meeting people from other cultures. And so as far as traveling goes, it fits well if you have that comfort with just going and talking to people whose culture you might not understand at all.
So last question I'll ask you is, what's next for y'all? And I know you've hinted at a few things, possible expansion, possibly new business model. What's your next big goal that you want to see happen with your company or with your organization?
Great question. I'm really excited by the end of this year to get to a point where we are making larger investments into our entrepreneurs and bringing the best social enterprises from across the entire United States here to Texas. Our current cohort 3, we recruited our first company from Mexico, Akamal Shop, to actually move here to go through our program. So I would love if we actually flip from having 20% outside of Austin to only 20% in Austin and the others from across the country.
Okay, so a couple of housekeeping things. Zoe does have another meeting tonight or somewhere she has to be. She is going to be available for a little bit though, so feel free to come up and say hi, get to meet her. If not, we'll get you in contact with her some other way via email or Twitter. But I just want to say to end, all the data you see says that this generation right here is the one that has never before had more impact on, or want to have an impact on social good. And so knowing that there are people around like you who can help make that happen makes me as an older person feel much better about the world. So let's all thank Zoe for coming in.
Thank you guys.
Just a reminder, I'm going to have the sign-in sheet right outside, so feel free to come up and say hi to Zoe.
Yeah, thank you guys. Feel free to come up and ask questions.